Hello, everyone. Welcome to the reading and writing section of my Acing the SAT on a Budget preview. The purpose of this preview is to give you a flavor of my book, Acing the SAT on a Budget. It's currently available on Amazon as a $6 Kindle ebook. All the proceeds go towards helping Afghan refugees through rescue.org. A little bit about me. My name is Imran Aziz, and on March 13th, 2021, I took the SAT and scored a 1600. I did this without any courses or tutoring. All I used were some old prep books and some free online resources. So if you haven't, you should check out some of my other videos on the SAT. So, my book approaches the writing section with three different chapters, and that's what I'll be talking about in this video. So the first chapter is going to be common writing mistakes. The second chapter is using Erica Meltzer's The Ultimate Guide to SAT Grammar, and then the third chapter is just some challenge problems that I handpicked. So common writing mistakes. Something you should think about when you're approaching the writing section is that getting a curve that allows even one writing mistake is very rare. So your goal, if you want a 1600 or really just a high score in general, is to have no mistakes on the writing section. The writing section is also very formulaic, and so it's more similar to the math section than the reading section because there are specific grammatical rules that you use on writing questions. So, mixing up punctuation. You can't mix up things like dashes, parentheses, and commas. If you start a parenthetical statement with a dash, you have to close it with a dash. So always make sure you look at the beginning and end of a parenthetical statement to make sure it matches up. Parallel structures. Parallel structures basically means that patterns need to be maintained. So if you have a sentence like, Bob likes hiking, swimming, and to run, that's incorrect because instead of being to run, it should be running to maintain that parallel structure that you set up with hiking and swimming. Group nouns are singular. So you can have a singular noun that refers to multiple things. So if I have something like the family of lions, that is still a singular noun even though lions is plural. Comma splices. So comma splices are when two sentences are combined with just a comma. If you see a comma and then a pronoun right afterwards, it's probably a comma splice and therefore wrong. If you combine two complete sentences, you need to use either a semicolon, a period, or a comma plus a conjunction to combine the sentences. Wrong comparisons. So make sure you're always comparing the right things. If you say, my grades are better than my brother, that's technically incorrect because the two things being compared are my grades and my brother. You should instead say, my grades are better than my brother's grades. Even if it seems a little bit repetitive, make sure that there's no ambiguity as to what is being compared. However. So words like however mean that what comes after contradicts what came before. Words like for example or furthermore mean that what comes after supports what came before. So anytime you have to choose between these kinds of transitional phrases, always make sure you look at the relationship between what's coming after the phrase and what's coming before you make a decision. Okay, so Erica Meltzer's The Ultimate Guide to SAT Grammar. So a personal observation is that high school emphasizes the content of writing and teaches, more higher level skills and it neglects these more technical aspects of grammar. So unless you've really kept up your grammar well, you will need resources to succeed on the writing test, and this book is one of the best out there. Generally, you should really just do any practice or example question that you see in this book. It has some helpful, just general test-taking strategies, but the most worthwhile thing in this book is just to make sure you've read every grammar rule that it has. There are quite a few pages, particularly at the end of chapters, where it sums up the rules that it gives, and so those are always really good to look at. Okay, so some challenge problems. So question 12, this is a pure parallelism question. All of the choices technically have the same meaning, but only one of them actually fits the parallel structure. So if you're confused on what parallelism is as a concept, then look at this question as a reference. Question 18. So this is a good example of a rhetoric question. So at their most basic, these words all have the same meaning, but they have different connotations and associations. So this is a good example of how words that have the same basic meaning are not necessarily substitutes. Okay, question 3. So this is a good example of a question where the transition words have different meanings. So being able to see that relationship between what comes before and what comes after is very important in choosing the right transition word. Question 24. So this is a good example of a potential sentence addition that only makes sense when there is specific information preceding it. Question 8. So this question can confuse you because there is a plural noun right in front of the verb in question. So make sure you know which noun the verb is actually applying to. Question 35. While the answer choices may seem very similar initially, you can see that when you actually put them in context, some just don't make sense. You need to make sure that the parenthetical definition applies to the correct subject. Question 16. So this is a good example of how different punctuation can give very different meanings. You really need to recognize the cause and effect in the sentence. Otherwise, you might put the comma or period or semicolon in the wrong place. Question 32. It's very tempting just to look at the underlined part and draw an immediate conclusion, but you have to look at the whole sentence before you classify what the ending punctuation should be. Okay, so that concludes the writing section, and now I'll be getting into the reading section. So the outline of my book and these slides is I'm first going to be going over some reading strategies, and then I've also included some selected reading questions. Okay, so strategies. So something important about reading is making sure you don't waste any time. Not every part of the passage needs to be completely understood. And then there are questions that you can do without knowing the entire passage. And so by ordering the questions, by doing these more specific questions first, where you don't need to know the whole passage, and then doing the ones where you do need to know the whole passage later, you can minimize how much time you spend on the passage in total. A strategy that I sometimes use is just reading the whole introduction paragraph and then just reading the first and last sentences of every other paragraph to save time during the initial read through. Then you can start actually doing the questions and you can get a better idea of where to find the answers by doing this. So every passage that you get on the SAT will have a short blurb at the beginning, and you should always read this very carefully. It can give some really helpful context for the passage. And then there are also some general questions, like I mentioned earlier, like summaries or main idea questions. And sometimes these starting blurbs will be very helpful in doing those. Disproving answers. Instead of trying to prove an answer choice, you can try to disprove it. If the choice is partially wrong, then it's all wrong and you can eliminate it. Going fast. So you can read the whole introduction paragraph, like I said earlier, and then just read the first and last sentences. And then you can start doing the questions after doing that. And then as you do the questions, you can start reading more and more of the passage. So when you're reviewing, so review every question that you either missed or were unsure about. And when you review, try to understand what reasoning you were using when you chose your initial answer and then why it's wrong. So some common reasons that you can list. You eliminated the correct answer too quickly. You made a careless error. Maybe you misread the question or the answer, or you just didn't understand the question in the first place. Maybe there's a word or something that you didn't understand. So after this, there's a collection of selective reading questions, and so I've said which practice tests and which questions they are. It wouldn't really make sense for me to get into them right now because they don't really make much sense without the context of the passage. But they are definitely important, and they do represent some important concepts. So I definitely suggest you look at those. Okay, thanks for watching.